So speaking of degrees of seriousness, let's start off this class by talking a little bit accounting, Star Wars, degrees of seriousness, internal validity, and being a father and an educator. What thread holds all of these things together? If anyone gets this, I'm going to be so impressed. In fact, if anyone gets this, I'll make cookies for you guys.
You just make cookies for us anyway?
Maybe. Yes?
No, that was my guess.
Master Nap. No, it's not.
What holds all of this?
There's like the common theme between accounting and Star Wars and being a dad and an educator and experiments, good experiments, not bad experiments, good ones, internally valid experiments. So today we're going to talk about internal validity. So Star Wars, what's Star Wars about? It's about Jedis and forces. Forces. What about the forces?
I don't know, I've never seen Star Wars.
What? Don't say that.
Ever.
Oh, I have them. So if you'd like to borrow, I can.
Okay.
I think they're also in the library. That would be better. You can borrow theirs. Yeah. So those of you who have seen Star Wars, what's the deal with the Force in Star Wars? I mean, yeah, it's cool, but besides the cool stuff, like what is Luke there for?
He's like the vessel that can control the Force.
He's a vessel that can control the Force, but Luke, there are other vessels that control the Force, and Luke offers something special.
He's got the highest amount of
The midi-chlorians?
Yeah. Not that I know those things.
Yeah. The mitochondria. Okay, how about accounting? Who's taken an accounting course? Is anyone in your liberal arts education? I'm like a liberal arts kind of guy, and I didn't really want to be, but it just happened. I started off as a musical theater major, so I used to sing and act and dance and all that jazz. And there was this one party that I went to. It was an after party for a show that I wasn't in, but I met this woman, and she was hot, and I was like, yeah. And I wanted to impress her, and I'm like, hey, check this out. I can do it. And I pulled off a triple pirouette. You guys know what a triple pirouette is? So this is just a single pirouette, not too hard for me. I'm not like perfect or anything. Three of those. Something that I like tried to do again and again and again. I worked on. I just like could never land it. And for some reason, with a little bit of alcohol in my system, I nailed it. I nailed my triple. And I was like, yes. I've shown her that I'm not just some, punk, because she was in the show. She danced, and I thought, I dance, you dance, hey. She was impressed, but she was convinced that I was gay because of that. It didn't work out for me. But anyway, so after musical theater, I went into business, and as a business major, I had to take accounting courses, and accounting was all about numbers and something else, something that relates to the Force. And what Luke was doing to the Force, what he was bringing to the galaxy. What was the other thing? Okay, so I'm a dad and an educator. And how do I be a good dad and be a good educator? There are conflicting things that I need to do, right? Be a good dad, maybe take my kids out and do stuff with them.
So you need to balance.
Balance! Beautiful! Thank you, gentlemen. Yeah, it's balance. It's all about balance. So in accounting, what do you have? You've got a whole bunch of numbers and they need to balance out, right? Debits need to balance out with the credits. Luke is bringing balance to the galaxy, right? Because there are all these bad dudes, bad powerful Sith Lords and stuff. And then there's Yoda, a little green guy who used to be awesome in his heyday, but he's kind of sucky now, he just fades into oblivion. And then there's Obi-Wan, who thinks he's going to be more powerful by getting cut down. And someone needs to be kind of bad butt, even if they're kind of whiny, to bring back some power to the good side of the Force, right? So the idea is that the good is going to balance with the bad. This is it happens all the time in like Eastern philosophy. The yin and the yang, they balance one another, the light and the dark. And a good experiment, so here's where experiments come in, where it's really relevant to this class. A good experiment balances things. It balances forces, like the Jedi. And my pirouette also tied in too, right? Because if I'm going to balance, what do I need to do? I mean, I need to like have a vestibular system that's working. And earlier today, I did this with my daughter a bunch of times. And then if I would have tried to do it, I probably would have fallen, right? So someone said that you need to adjust, right? Focus on a point, that helps. But even if you focus on the point, if you can't do the other things, like I could focus on the point and fall over, right?
That was my attempt to figure out what there.
So how do those adjustments need to be done? I'm thinking of a C word that's involved. Center. Ooh, that's good. Balanced. For something to be balanced, there has to be a center point, much like the mean. That's interesting. I wasn't thinking about going there, but okay. What else? Another C word. So when we were talking about variables at the beginning of the semester, and I was talking about Dr. Timmerman and myself, and there were some other terms for variables that had come up besides independent, dependent, extraneous, and confounding. There's another C one. It has to do with extraneous variables.
Confounded?
Well, a confounding variable is a special type of extraneous variable. What's an extraneous variable again?
Something extra-spective, any variable.
Yes, any variable besides the independent variable that could potentially affect the dependent variable, right? So we're talking about violence in playgrounds in the last class. And I wanted to see if there was an effect of some anti-bullying intervention, right? And what other things could affect violence on the playground?
How we're treated at home.
How they're treated at home, right? So kids that are treated more poorly at home, we would expect them to act more violently at school. What other things? Peer pressure, maybe the school that they go to, there's a lot of pressure to stand up for yourself and fight, as opposed to hey, we all need to be friends, let's calm down, right? So there are lots and lots of things that could potentially affect someone's choice in whether or not they're violent on the playground. Does that make sense? So all of these things are extraneous variables. And because they're extraneous variables, they could potentially be confounded. But what else did you say? They could be correlated. Well, if an extraneous variable is correlated with the independent variable, then it is confounded, right? So what do we do to an extraneous variable to make sure that it's not going to correlate with the independent variable? Use the 4C+.
A+.
Consider yourself.
Contracting.
Control! Control! We talked about control last class, right? So we said, okay, we're going to give some schools this anti-bullying intervention, and then we're going to give some other schools some pseudo intervention that looks kind of like that, but it's different in some key aspect. Why? Why is that crucial? It's crucial to control. It's crucial. How many of you guys know about the Hawthorne Effect? You guys heard about this, the Hawthorne Effect? I'm almost positive that's what it's called. What is it?
When you're observing someone, they have work.
Yeah, so there were these studies that were done at some plant, and they wanted to see what types of manipulations the plant owners could do to increase the productivity of their workers. Right? This is a great thing. We can increase productivity. We're going to make more money. So they had some researchers come in, and the researchers did things like, oh, let's increase the illumination. Yes, this costs a little bit more money to power the extra lights, but if it results in a productivity gain that outweighs that, it's going to be worth it, right? So they turned on the lights, and the scientists were in there, and they were going around and looking at people's behaviors and recording what the people were doing. And what did the people do?
Work hard.
They worked harder. Why? They're being watched.
They won't get fired.
They don't want to get fired. That's exactly right. Right? So when you're watching someone do their work, if they're not totally freaked out and, I don't imagine this would work well in a high pressure situation where people are already under a lot of stress. But if you're just putting together widgets and now someone's watching you and you know that they're trying to make more money and you're not doing a good job, they can fire you. So okay, the scientist is there, let's increase our productivity. Oh my goodness, they increased the lights, productivity went up. What else did they do? They decreased the lights. What happened to productivity? It increased. Why? Because the people were being watched, right? So they had these expectations. The participants were reacting not to the manipulation itself, the intended manipulation, which was what happens when we increase or decrease the light, but they were reacting to a confounded manipulation, which was what? Being watched, right? So being watched went together with those changes. So we can't be sure if it was those changes that resulted in the change in productivity or whether it was just being watched that increased productivity. Does that make sense? So we set up our two conditions, one the anti-bullying thing and one the placebo anti-bullying thing, in order so that way both schools, or not both, but all of the schools that were participating should have roughly equivalent expectations about what should be happening. I mean, imagine if the teachers are telling the students things like, okay guys, we've been selected to be part of a special anti-bullying program, and let's see what's gonna, geez, I'm spitting all over, excuse me, let me back up. Let's see what happens, okay? So we're going to attend these classes, and we're gonna do whatever it is that they're asking us to do, and let's see how it goes. What are the students gonna be thinking? How might the students change? Yeah, right? Maybe they're gonna be like, oh, Mustang Spirit, or Cougar Power, or whatever their school mascot is, right? And we're going to band together as a school, and we're going to show that we don't have to be, bullies here.
I don't know, try that in Vegas. That won't work too well.
Is there no school spirit in Vegas?
No.
You're missing out. Anyway, so if you only introduce the anti-bullying program in one school and you just say, okay, you guys, you didn't make the cut, just do whatever you're going to do and we're going to measure you anyway, there's going to be a huge difference in the expectations of the administrators and of the instructors and of the students potentially, and maybe their parents, right? And all these changes in their expectations could affect the outcome. So what do we want to do? We want to create balance between the situation that we're really interested in, our anti-bullying intervention, and a control situation. Why do we call it a control? Because it's supposed to control for the expectations and those other things, right? So we haven't talked at length about what distinguishes correlational study from an experiment. So let's talk about these two types of studies. How are they similar? How are they different? What types of things can you do in one that you can't do in another?
Correlation, you can't place on the causal effect relationship.
Okay, so correlation to correlational study and an experiment. And claims about causation. Weak, strong. Why?
Correlation does not equal causation.
Correlation does not equal causation, but in an experiment, when we are analyzing our data, all we have to go on is the correlation. Remember when we were talking about causal events and the causal change? And one of the necessary but not sufficient conditions for inferring causation was that you had to have a correlation, right? If there's no correlation, there's no relationship between those two things. So even in an experiment, you've got correlation. So correlation. Yes. Yes. So what differs between those two that allows us to make strong claims about causation, well, potentially make strong claims about causation in an experiment, but not in a correlational study?
all different kinds of variables.
Manipulation. You said all types of variables. So let's say manipulation for the independent variable and manipulation for extraneous variables. And with a correlational study, what do we have? Yes, no, maybe so. Can we manipulate the independent variable? How many say yes? A correlational study, can you manipulate the independent variable? 1, 2, y. How many people say no, you can't manipulate an independent variable in a correlational study? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6, no. Let's do the same thing for an experiment. So, in an experiment, can you manipulate the independent variable? Okay, that's almost everyone. How many of you guys say that you can't? Is there anyone? Okay, so it was unanimous. Yes. Okay, so let's see if we can resolve this issue. Let's have a debate. So who said you can? You can manipulate the independent variable in a correlational study. Okay, how can you manipulate the independent variable?
Well, basically you can just change it and then do the study again, though you don't need to completely change the parameters as you would in an experiment.
So, like, when you say you're going to change it and do the experiment again, like, what type of variable are you thinking about manipulating?
Well, just things in general. I mean, I guess you might not manipulate it, so to speak, but it will change and you will see that in the study.
So you're saying that okay. The first thing you said, well, is that you can manipulate it and look at it differently in a later study. The second thing that you said was, well, maybe you can't manipulate it, but it can change. And I think those are two different things. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're on the same page there. So what do you think is more accurate? Can you manipulate the variable, or can the variable change?
Well, you can do whatever you want, but it won't necessarily work.
I think more of a change than put it that way.
More of a change. We have to have change. We have to have variability, or else we can't run any of our analyses, right? Because we're relying on that variance, on those variations to figure out whether any differences are likely to be indicative of real effects or just pure chains, right? So yes, absolutely. The IV must change. So CS, correlation study, EX, experiment, IV, change. Yes. Can't be manipulated. So there were a lot of people that said no, can't be manipulated. So let's hear from them. So who said no, you can't manipulate? Why can't you manipulate? I mean, you're the study, the researcher. What's going on? Why are you so impotent that you can't manipulate it?
I was going off of some of the examples that you had in class.
Okay.
The variables that you can't control, like
what?
Gender. You can't control like when you did studying.
I can control physical phenotypes somewhat. I can take I can take women that are pregnant very early on in their pregnancy, and I can inject them with high levels of testosterone, which will end up producing the male phenotype. Or I can inject them with, what is it called? It's like an androgen blocker, basically.
Yeah, I know what you're talking
And it will block. So there are these individuals who genetically, their genotype is male, but their phenotype is female. Why? Because they have androgen insensitivity syndrome. So they have these gonads that start to produce testosterone, but their body isn't sensitive to the testosterone that's being produced, so their body doesn't masculinize. So they end up with the biological default, which is female. Isn't that cool? We all could have been women had we not had, darn, if only I had. So I could manipulate that in theory. But in reality, that would be highly, highly unethical, right? People would go flipping out.
I was looking out, just saying.
Right? So, yeah, I can't really manipulate things like sex, if we think about sex in terms of the external phenotype. And I have an even harder time controlling the genotype, right? There are other things I could do. I could take little boys and raise them in the stereotypical female way or vice versa, but also then I run into huge ethical problems. So those are things that I really can't adjust. So if I want to learn, are men better drivers than women? She's shaking her head. Well, they may be, they may not be. It depends on how we're going to operationalize driving ability, perhaps. But the problem is we can't ever say for sure that it's being male or being female for all those other reasons that we've already talked about. It could have been the toys you played with. It could have been the way that people treated you as you grew up. It could have been any of those things, right? So because it could have been any of those things, all of those things are correlated with the thing that we are really interested in, which is maleness or femaleness, in however we operationalize it, right? So all of those extraneous variables are correlated, which means they're confounded. Which means what? If you think back to our criteria for talking about causal relationships, we had to have a correlation. We had to have temporal precedence. Maybe or maybe not, we had to have a causal mechanism. But we also had to be able to rule out the possibility of compounds. And the way that we rule out the possibility of compounds is by controlling the variation of extraneous variables. And because I can't control how you were brought up, or what toys you got 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, or however long ago, that means that those things are potentially confounded, which limits my strength to draw claims about causation. Because in a correlational study, I can't control all of those things. I make my observations. Are you Republican? Are you Democrat? But if you're Republican and Democrat, probably you grew up in different types of households or different areas of the country. I can't control that. So I can't be sure if it's being a Republican that makes people want something or whether it's growing up in that type of family environment or in that particular type of community. So if I were to poll you guys again, and ask you whether or not we can manipulate the independent variable in a correlational study, can we or can we not? How many for yes, we can? How many for no, we can't? You're unconvinced?
Something like that. It can change or be changed. It's not ethical and it will ruin the experiment, but you can still do it.
Well, but if you do it, if you do make that change, all of a sudden what you have is you have went beyond the correlational study into an experiment. That is the key difference. This, being able to manipulate the variable or not, is the sole determiner of whether or not you have a correlational study or an experiment. So I'm going to put no. You're right. So, I can inject people with testosterone. If I did that, I'd have an experiment. People do that. Not with human infants, to my knowledge, but they've done it with rats. Why do some, people come out to be males, and why do some turn out to be females? Well, let's find out. There's this gene, and it produces this gene SRY, and then it produces this chemical cascade, and then testosterone is released and all of that. Let's see if we can inject what should be females with high amounts of testosterone and see what happens. That's an experiment. Until you do that, you're just relying on correlations. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And there are some things that you can control. So if I want to look at Republicans and Democrats and independents, what types of things can I control? So I can't control what you are. Or actually, I might be able to. There are some studies that manipulate some variable, like here, read this news article, and then let's see how you feel about a particular, political issue before and after you read that article. So we can influence people's ways of leaning, which is why politicians spend so much money advertising, right? Because they know that they can influence it. But aside from that, it's not like I can take out my magic wand and ping, you're a Democrat, ping, Republican, ping, independent. I can't do it, right? Manipulations will be subtle. But what can I control?
The numbers.
Yeah, I can control the numbers. I can make sure that I have 30 Republicans, 30 Democrats, 30 independents. Using what concept from the last class? It has to do with sampling. Stratified random sampling, right? All right. So I have a list of people who are registered Republicans. I'm going to randomly choose 20 of them. Or maybe randomly choose them until I get 20. I'll do the same thing for Democrats. I'll do the same thing for Tea Partiers. I'll do the same thing for whatever number of political groups that I'm interested in, right? So I can control the numbers of individuals that I'm observing, but I still can't control what their party affiliation would be, what their gender would be, what their ethnicity would be, what their religious beliefs would be. I can't control those things. At least not to the extent that I can learn about people with this belief or that belief, right? Manipulate it subtly and see how the beliefs change. Does that make sense? And what does picking 20 independents and 20 Republicans and 20 Democrats give me? Use a force. No, it gives me balance. That's exactly right. It gives me balance. And balance is crucial. Why would balance be so important? In correlational studies and in experiments, to the extent that you can have balance.
Like if you wanted to stick with the politics idea and you wanted to see which party was more earth-friendly, you could stack it against. You could have 180 Democrats versus 28 Republicans. And be like, hey, look at all this data I found. It's skewed. They're not even.
It could potentially be skewed, right? The mean, whether it's a mean of 2 or a mean of 200, it's an unbiased mean, but we know that the sampling error of those means is going to be different. So in some sense, our estimate with 200 is much better than our estimate with 2. So by getting equal-sized groups, our estimate should be equally good for all of those, right? On average, in the long run. It's still possible that any one of our groups is a little bit odd, but we would expect them to be the same, on average, equally good representations, right? So that's balance, and this balance is going to be absolutely crucial for some of the statistics that we are going to talk about in the future. Some of the statistics that we want to run require equal numbers of participants in different conditions. If you don't have the equal number of participants in the different conditions, what happens? The assumptions that the statistics are built off of fail, and you can't justify running some of those statistics. So by ensuring that your samples are balanced in terms of size, you allow yourself greater flexibility in how you analyze the data, which is a great thing. So let's talk about manipulating extraneous variables. Can we manipulate extraneous variables in experiments and correlational studies? You can just holler out what you think if you want, so I don't have to poll. Okay, how about correlational studies? Can you manipulate extraneous variables? No. How many people say no? 7, 8. Looks like more than half the class, about 9. How many people say yes? Yes, you can control extraneous variables. 1. All right, you're in the minority again, so I'm putting you on the spot. How on earth? If you can't manipulate your independent variable, how are you going to manipulate extraneous variables? Can you give me one example? One example. This is sort of like the black swan proof, right? All swans are right. Well, if you can show me one black swan, logically, you can prove that there are some black swans, although we talk about reality and all that jazz. But can you give me one black swan? What's one extraneous variable that you can manipulate, that you can just demonstrate that all of your classmates are wrong?
Well, basically anything can have an effect on it. Then you can change everything around it. You can leave another newspaper on someone's desk. You can set up the questions on a survey that have different answers. And those
Like
all-
what? Okay, so we're going to create a survey to measure people's feelings about the SCOTUS hearing today on whether gay marriage should be legal in America and it shouldn't be a state issue, right? So we could create a survey to find this, and we could get people with different political affiliations, grab some Republicans, grab some independents, grab some Democrats, and give them our survey. How are we controlling anything? Connor, answer your
Control the
question.
survey.
You can control the survey. Are there any maybe disreputable surveys out there?
Probably most of them.
I wish I could.
Or you can get biased.
How do you bias a survey?
Well, you're supposed to have like unambiguous questions, and if you like a little rabbit trail with your questions to get a certain outcome with it. And like, you know, like you do like, there was this like study thing, like the white people and black people in pictures, and then if it was a weapon or just an item.
Mm-hmm.
It's like different stereotypes and everything can like come through on the different unbiased or unambiguous questions.
Yeah.
Or so saying, what do you see in this picture? Do you see a weapon in this picture?
Do you see a weapon in this picture as opposed to what's there?
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
you're getting people already to think about weapons. And if they're already thinking about weapons, maybe they're going to be more likely to see weapons when they aren't there. Right? This is known as priming. I think we talked a little bit about priming, right? You say nurse, and people are faster to recognize the word doctor. So by saying weapons, we want to see if you can identify weapons versus tools. Maybe some subjects are thinking more about weapons already, and by thinking more about weapons, it's decreasing the threshold that they need to reach before they say that something is a weapon. Yeah, absolutely. In the cocktail party effect, you guys all know what that is?
Is that where you hear your name on the other side of the room?
Yeah, so you're at a party and people are dancing, having a good time. And I'm talking with my friend. Oh, hey, did you see Josie the other day in class? What was she wearing? And Josie's all the way over there talking with her friends, and she hears Josie. And it's not like I'm like, no, did you see Josie? No, it's quiet. No one else around her even notices anything, but Josie's like, why? Because her threshold for that word is lowered. So yeah, maybe we can bias someone. So imagine I were to poll you about Obama. You know, on a scale of 1 to 100, 1 being completely dissatisfied and 100 being completely satisfied. How do you feel about Obama? And people give me their answers. Now imagine I preceded that with, you know, Obama's failure to follow up on Benghazi resulted in whatever. Obama did this and that resulted in something else negative. And Obama did this and blah, 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 blah. How do you feel about Obama? What would we expect? People's answers are going to decrease in satisfaction. Versus like, oh wow, so many more people have healthcare now. Or oh wow, so many, you know, this is great. How do you feel about Obama? Right? So by controlling the questions that are on the survey for a strictly correlational study, we can potentially affect the outcome, right? Now, if we're doing a good correlational study, we wouldn't want to bias our survey so that it would push people towards a particular answer, right? Maybe we'll give 4 good examples of things that Obama has done that people generally feel good about, and we'll give 4 bad examples of things that Obama has done, right? So they're equivalent numbers, at least on the survey, we controlled for the amount of negative and positive information that we've presented. Thereby avoiding the potential for that particular extraneous variable to confound. Does that make sense? And we do this by giving everyone exactly the same surveys. So I control not only how many participants I have in each group, I can control the structure of my survey, I can control the setting in which I go give my surveys. Do I go ask people how they feel about Obama Friday night when they're feeling good? Do I ask them after a class in civics? I'm probably going to get different answers depending on when I'm asking them and where I'm asking them, right? So I can control all those things. I can control where I ask people questions, when I ask people questions, lots of things about the environment, even if I'm doing a correlational study. Does that make sense? So, I am in full agreement with you.
Thank you.
Yes. Have I convinced the rest of you? Tori?
Yeah, I actually have a question.
Yes!
Oh, it's like really simple. On this board, when you wrote that one, was that supposed to be something different, or is that the same as your manipulation for the infinite?
No. Well, so this is different than the manipulation. This means that the IV changes, right? And there's a difference between changing or an IV that changes and an IV that I manipulate. So an IV that changes, let's say I wanted to see how you guys were feeling about legalizing gay marriage, right? So I can ask you yes or no, I don't want to know, but I can ask you, she's a female. Ask him, he's male, right? I can have people indicate their sex or gender or religion or whatever I want. And that's going to change from person to person, right? So I'm going to have some Jews and some atheists. I'm going to have some white people and some black people. I'm going to have, you know, all of the different people potentially represented if my sample size is large enough. So the independent variables will change, but I'm not the one that's making them change.
So it's like changing throughout it, where the manipulation is changing each single one.
The manipulation, I, as the experimenter, power-hungry guy, I'm the one that's creating the change. You're participating in my study. Please drink this water. Please drink this water. And you both know that it's a study on caffeine. So you know that you may or may not have caffeine, but you can't taste it. You have no idea. She's got none. He has 100 milligrams. Right? I control that.
And that's when it becomes the experiment.
That's an experiment. That's exactly right. So thinking about the caffeine intake in performance, or maybe something even, some arguments that have been made. Think about smoking. Does smoking cause cancer? Yeah.
No.
Well, how do you study this in humans? Hey, I want to, do a study and find out whether smoking causes cancer. And I'm going to pay you all. This is something that's unethical. It's called undue influence. And when I pay someone an amount they would do something that they would not normally be willing to do, I have unduly influenced their decision. So, for college students, most of you, I'm going to pay you guys $20,000 to participate in my study, okay? And if you participate in my study, you will either smoke nothing or I'm going to make you smoke, right? 20 grand. If you didn't smoke and someone offered you 20 grand to smoke for 1 year, just 1 year, would you do it?
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
I have no morals for $20.
Yeah, the cigarettes are free. I provide them for you, man.
Yeah.
How much do you have to smoke?
A pack a day.
Oh.
But we'll titrate up. We'll titrate up. So the first month, you'll start off with one cigarette a day for a couple days, and then you'll do 2, and then we'll go up to 4. But we'll get you up to a full pack by the end of the month.
And if I become addicted, are you going to pay for my, rehab stuff?
You've got 20 grand. You can go pay for your own patches.
Pay for your
Gone.
school.
Yeah, I don't have the money anymore.
Okay.
No, how about 50,000?
Yeah.
Well, higher.
100,000.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, I've got your price. So I've unduly influenced people to do this, right? But really, I'm still the one that's manipulating them. I would get a group of people that would agree to participate, and then I would randomly choose who's going to smoke and who doesn't. It wouldn't be like, yes, I already smoked, please sign me up. No, sorry, you can't participate. I need people who aren't smoking, and I'm going to randomly assign them. And then look at your death rates as time goes on. Right? That's a manipulation. And if I did that, then I could draw very strong causal claims about smoking causing cancer, but I can't do that. It's completely unethical in humans. And I say that in humans because how have they done studies like this? They do it in monkeys, rats, other organisms, other non-human organisms, because you can't do this in humans. Right? And there are a lot of people that would argue that's completely unethical in non-human animals too. That's a different question. But the key ingredient is to say like smoking causes cancer. If you just go around and you find people that are smoking, yeah, I smoke 2 packs a day, and you find people who are like, no, I don't smoke anything. I just talk like this. I used to be in the military and I yelled a lot. He's bad. I'm bad. So, and you find out that the smokers that talk like this end up dying a lot more than the other people that talk like this. Maybe it's not the smoking that caused them to die. Maybe there was something wrong with them and they could feel this when they were younger. And they knew that, not they consciously knew, but their body knew of this. And it actually led them to smoke. And the smoking actually prolonged their life longer than it would have been other. This is completely ridiculous, but it's possible. Right? We don't know if people who die of cancer, if they're dying of cancer because of the smoking or because they're dying of some personality trait that leads them to smoke and also to have cancer. Right? So the only way that we can really answer the questions about that is to go beyond the correlational study and do a proper experiment where we're manipulating the variable that we believe is the one that's causing the cancer, that's causing the violence, or that's causing anything else that we're particularly interested in. Does that make sense? Okay, so last class, I briefly said we're going to do this anti-bullying intervention at a school. Imagine that I just randomly selected a bunch of schools, and all of them were going to do this anti-bullying intervention. And I measured, I went out there, I had people hide behind the bushes in the playgrounds. This is really creepy, but. So they're hiding in the bushes at the playgrounds, so that way the kids don't know that they're there. And they're very good. They've been trained by the Army Rangers, so they've got their gunny, is that right? The gunny suits? Ghillie suits, thank you. They've got their ghillie suits on, they're basically invisible, and they're recording the number of times that there's violence, however we operationalize it, whether it's verbal abuse, I hate you, Jimmy, or whether it's physical abuse. Anyway, they're counting all that stuff, and they do this for a month before the anti-bullying campaign. Then we do our thing, and then they come back a month later, and then they do this again for another month. What's the problem with that experiment? There is manipulation, right? I manipulated anti-bullying. They didn't have it, I took a measurement, they had it, and then I took an additional measurement. That's an experiment. I manipulated something. I got the consent. I got their parents to sign off. They don't mind these guys in ghillie suits peeking at their kiddos. So I've got all of that stuff. I'm good.
Would you say there was a time lapse between when you did the...
Yeah, well, the anti-bullying intervention takes time. So yeah, I do my measure for a month. They count off all the violent things. Then I have my 2-month intervention, and then the people come back maybe a month later, so 3 months have passed, and then measure the kids again.
Wouldn't it be helpful to do a measurement while they're doing the bullying thing too, though, to see if they've actually taken root?
Well, but if it took root, wouldn't I see the change afterwards? Things are expensive. It costs money to have people sit out there and watch kids and count the number of times that they yell at one another and hit. That's costly. So yes, I could do that, but let's not complicate things yet. What's the problem with that? What have I not controlled for? What?
Wait, are you still talking about the? Sorry, I don't mean it that way. I just want to make sure I'm on the same page.
I'm talking about the anti-bullying intervention, before and after. And I've made a manipulation, but what's the problem?
No, I wasn't.
What is confounded with my anti-bullying intervention?
Homework.
No. Because the anti-bullying intervention is happening for kids that have crappy home lives, and it's happening for kids that have great home lives, right? It's happening for the kids at that school who are Muslim. It's happening for kids at that school who are Christian, right? Oh, that's control. That's control. This is one of the beautiful things about random assignment. By randomly assigning people or randomly assigning schools, I'm ensuring that I have equal numbers of rich schools in my anti-bullying thing, and I have equal numbers of rich schools in my non-anti-bullying campaign, right? Or if I'm just doing the anti-bullying, which I said I was a minute ago, basically each school is as rich as each school is, right? I'm getting the rich school before and after the campaign. I'm getting the poor school before and after the campaign. I'm getting the inner city school before and after the campaign. I'm getting the rural school before and after the campaign. I've got a lot of control. I don't have to worry about, oh, well, this is just the rural group over here that's not getting bullying, and this is all the urban stuff over here, and they're getting the intervention, right? Because if I did it like that, I have a conflict. But now I've forgotten what my question was from Josie.
Something that was wrong with it.
Yes, what's wrong with it? Can you identify the problem in 2 minutes?
Does it have to do with how it's set up?
Yes. Ding, ding, ding. You want to try to go more? Because you're on the right path, but you haven't nailed it yet.
Guys in the ghillie suits, maybe? I don't know if there's some bias going on.
Let's say that they're hidden well enough and none of the kids notice. I mean, yes, that could potentially be it. Maybe, I mean, so presumably if the kids saw the guys in the ghillie suits, they might be a little freaked out. So instead of like acting violently towards one another, they'd all be like, what the heck is that dude doing over there? So that's a possibility, but let's eliminate that. And in fact, we're going to do this with already pre-existing CCTVs. We'll get rid of the guys in the ghillie suits, and you know how some schools have the cameras monitoring things. We're just going to look at that. That way there's nothing that seems off. Okay? That's a better experiment. We've controlled for the possibility that people are going to know that they're being observed or not. Because if people know they're being observed, they'll change. So, good one. There's another problem.
Does this have to do with the no control group?
No, because each group sort of is its own control. Right? You have before and after.
For the bullying, are you just looking for playground bullying? Is that like the scope of it, or else?
Yeah, that's how I've operationalized it, just playground stuff. Oh man, you're so close. Just stop before you say consuming and say it louder.
Time?
Yes, that's exactly right. It has to do with the time. So, why didn't you say it? I thought you got it right, which is why I said your name, because I thought I heard it. Anyway, it has to do with time. We do something, we make a manipulation. This manipulation takes time. 3 months, the kids have all matured more. They've been in school that year a little bit longer. Maybe towards the end of the year, kids are less violent than they were at the beginning because they're less stressed out about a new environment. They've learned the school rules and regulations. So we have a confound. The time moved by at the same rate that our anti-bullying campaign went. This is why if we have the anti-bullying intervention at some schools and the pseudo one in other schools, why this is a better design. Because we should control for the expectations, we also control for that time. Adieu.